The room was cold in the way that only rooms built for endings ever are. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray Milan skyline. A long mahogany table with papers already fanned across it like a deck of cards waiting to be played. The lawyer sat at one end, silver pen in hand, reading glasses perched low on his nose, pretending not to be nervous. He had every reason to be nervous. Because Matteo Rinaldi was already in the room. He stood at the window with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, the Italian script tattooed along the back of his neck disappearing beneath his collar like a secret. His forearms were visible, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the dark ink of ancient symbols and flowing cursive pressed into olive skin. His knuckles, resting one over the other, bore the letters that had meant something once. Something he no longer allowed himself to think about. He had not moved in 11 minutes. The lawyer had counted. Then the door opened. And Matteo Rinaldi, a man who had faced down rival syndicates, walked away from car bombs and sat across negotiating tables from men who wanted him dead, went completely, utterly still. The air in the room changed. She walked in like she always had. Quietly. Gracefully. With the kind of composure that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. Her chestnut hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands falling against her jaw. She wore a deep ivory maternity dress that fell to mid-calf, simple and elegant, a short camel-colored coat draped over her shoulders. She did not look at him immediately. She set her bag on the chair beside her lawyer, smoothed the front of her dress with one hand and then, only then, looked up. The belly was unmistakable. 7 months. Round and full and real, stretching the fabric of that ivory dress in a way that no tailoring could disguise. She was 7 months pregnant and she had walked into this room carrying it like it was simply a part of her, because it was. Because it had been for months. Months that Matteo Rinaldi had known nothing about. He turned from the window. His eyes dropped. And everything stopped. Before we go any further, if you're already feeling something, you're exactly where this story wants you. Please like, share and subscribe. Now let's go back to the beginning, because the ending only makes sense when you understand everything that came before it. 18 months earlier, Giulia Conti had been a woman in love with a man she was only beginning to understand was a storm she could not survive. She had met Matteo Rinaldi at a charity gala in Florence. One of those gilded evenings where old money wore new suits and everyone smiled at everyone else with teeth that could cut glass. She had been there as the plus one of a colleague, wearing a borrowed blue dress, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't touched, studying a Caravaggio reproduction on the far wall because it was more honest than anything else in the room. He had appeared beside her without sound. That was the first thing she noticed. A man that large should not be able to move without announcement. He was 6'3" and built like something ancient, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, with a jaw that could have been carved from stone. The neck tattoo was visible above the collar of his black suit. The forearms, where he'd rolled his sleeves despite the formality of the event, showed ink that caught the chandelier light like a second language. "You're studying the wrong painting," he said. She hadn't looked at him right away. A calculated choice even then. "Am I?" "There's a Titian on the east wall. The emotion is more honest." She had turned then. And she had made her first mistake. She had looked directly into his eyes. They were dark. Almost black in that light. Cold in the way still water is cold. Not aggressive, just deep. Impossibly deep. "Matteo Rinaldi," he said, extending a hand. The knuckle tattoos shifted as he moved. Letters pressed into skin. She had taken his hand. "Giulia Conti." "I know," he said. And that was the beginning of everything. He had pursued her the way he did everything. With patience, precision, and the absolute certainty that he would not be refused. But what stunned her in those first weeks was that he was never cruel about it. Never demanding. He sent flowers to her apartment without notes. He arranged for her favorite restaurant to be privately reserved on a Tuesday evening and showed up there himself as if by coincidence and asked if he might join her. He made her feel chosen. Deliberately, specifically chosen. She knew who he was. Of course she did. Milan's underworld was not a secret to anyone who had grown up in the city's edges the way she had. The daughter of a minor bookkeeper who had made the mistake of keeping the wrong family's accounts. She knew the name Rinaldi. Knew the weight of it. But Matteo in person was nothing like the ghost stories. He listened when she spoke. He remembered. He asked questions that went past surface level and waited, actually waited, for real answers. He looked at her like she was something he was trying to understand, not something he was trying to acquire. She fell in love with him the way people fall asleep. Gradually and then all at once. They married 8 months after the gala. A small ceremony at his estate outside the city. She wore white. He wore black. He cried, just once, just briefly, when she walked toward him, and he looked away before she could be sure she had seen it. For 4 months she had believed it was the life she wanted. The fractures started small. A cancelled dinner. A phone call that emptied a room the moment he answered it. A locked study she learned not to ask about. Men she didn't know appearing at their door at 2 in the morning and being let in without explanation. He was not naive. She had known what she was marrying. But knowing and living were entirely different landscapes. The night that changed everything was a Wednesday in October. She had been awake at midnight, couldn't sleep, had been reading in the kitchen with a cup of tea, when she heard voices in the garden. She hadn't meant to listen. But the window was cracked and one of the voices was Matteo's, low and controlled, speaking in the particular cadence he used when he was not negotiating but deciding. "Handle it," he said. "Just that. Handle it and make sure there's nothing to find." She never learned what it referred to. She told herself it could mean 100 things. She told herself that for 6 more weeks, getting better at the telling each time. The second fracture was worse. A woman showed up at the estate while Matteo was traveling. Expensive clothes, expensive perfume, the kind of beauty that wore itself like armor. She stood at the gate and asked for Matteo with the familiarity of someone who had stood there before. When Julia came to the gate herself, the woman had looked her over slowly, from the simple cardigan to the bare face to the wedding ring, and smiled the kind of smile that was designed to land like a blow. "I didn't know he'd replaced me so quickly," the woman said. "Though I suppose you were always a placeholder." Julia had not responded. She had turned, walked back into the house and sat in the kitchen for 40 minutes before she was able to breathe normally. When Matteo returned and she asked him about the woman, he didn't deny knowing her. He said it was complicated. He said it was old history. He said she didn't need to worry about it. He didn't say, "It's over." He didn't say, "She meant nothing." He didn't say, "You are the only one." He said she didn't need to worry. And that precise, condescending dismissal was the beginning of the end. She left on a Sunday morning in January. She had planned it for 2 weeks. Quietly. Methodically. The way she did everything, without drama, without announcement, with the particular efficiency of a woman who knows that if she lets herself feel it fully, she will not be able to move. She packed 1 suitcase. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside a short letter. Not an accusation, not a plea. Simply a statement. "I cannot be the person you need me to be in the life you have chosen. I am sorry. Goodbye, Matteo." She had not known she was pregnant when she walked out the door. She found out 3 weeks later in a small clinic in Turin, where she had gone to visit her college friend Serena and had made an appointment because she'd been exhausted in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. The nurse had congratulated her with a warm smile. Julia had sat very still for a long time after. The months that followed were the hardest and the strangest of her life. She was alone in a way she had never been before. Not lonely but genuinely, structurally alone. No husband. No family in the city. Just Serena's spare room and a pregnancy that was growing regardless of whether she was ready for it. She made decisions. She made them carefully, the way she always made decisions, turning them over like stones to see what lived underneath. She decided she would not tell Matteo. Not yet. Not until she understood what she wanted. Not until the divorce was finalized and she was on stable ground. She had watched too many women use a pregnancy as a bargaining chip in a crumbling marriage, and she refused to be that. She refused to trap him. She refused to trap herself. She found an apartment in Turin. Small, clean, with a good window that faced west and caught the afternoon light. She enrolled in a freelance design course to keep her skills sharp and her mind occupied. She attended every prenatal appointment. She built, piece by piece, the infrastructure of a life she could manage alone. She was 5 months along before she contacted the lawyer. She had chosen him carefully. Avvocato Ferrante, one of Milan's most respected family law practitioners, known for his discretion and his complete, unflappable lack of interest in whose husband he was divorcing. He had filed the papers without comment. He had handled the correspondence with Matteo's legal team without ever needing to meet with her in person. Till now. Until today. Because Matteo Rinaldi had refused for 6 months to sign. Back in the marble room, the silence was enormous. Matteo stood at the window's edge, one hand now gripped around the back of the nearest chair, the knuckle tattoos white against the mahogany. His dark eyes had not moved from her since she walked in. Since he saw Giulia met his gaze with the composure she had been practicing for months. She sat down across from her lawyer, smoothed her coat and folded her hands on the table. Avvocato Ferrante, she said, her voice even. Shall we begin? Ferrante cleared his throat and looked at his papers. Matteo still hadn't spoken. He was still standing. Still staring. His right-hand man, Enzo, a lean, watchful man in his 40s with the eyes of someone who'd spent decades cataloging danger, was positioned near the door. He hadn't moved either. But Giulia caught the subtle flicker in his expression. Something between shock and a kind of grim recognition. Enzo had known her. Had liked her, she'd always thought. He'd called her Signora with genuine warmth, not the practiced deference he showed everyone else in Matteo's orbit. Now he looked at her belly and she watched him do the math. Matteo, Ferrante's co-counsel, a younger man who clearly had not been briefed on the full situation, addressed the silent giant by the window. If you'd like to take your seat, we can review the amended terms. Who? Matteo said. His voice was very quiet. That was always the warning sign. The quieter Matteo got, the more dangerous the room became. I beg your pardon? Ferrante's co-counsel blinked. Who is the father? He said it as a statement. Not a question. A challenge. Giulia felt the familiar coil of anger thread through her chest. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. That, she said, is not relevant to the terms of the divorce. It is relevant to me. You are not entitled to my private medical information. Giulia. He said her name the way he always said it, like it cost him something. Like the word itself was a complete sentence. She kept her eyes on the papers in front of Ferrante. Let's proceed. There was a sound from Matteo's side of the room, not a word, not quite. More like the sound of someone swallowing something that didn't want to go down. Then slowly he pulled out the chair and sat. The knuckle tattoos rested on the table's edge. The forearm ink shifted as he leaned forward, elbows on mahogany, eyes fixed on her face with a concentration so total it felt like pressure. 6 months, he said, quieter now. Controlled. The deadliest version of him. You've been gone 6 months. And you are. He stopped. His jaw tightened. 7 months. Giulia said nothing. You were already pregnant when you left. Still nothing. You knew. He said it slowly. Like he was hearing himself say it and not quite believing it. You knew and you didn't. I didn't know, she said. Just that. Clean and factual. I found out after. The room was unbearable. Ferrante was studying his pen with great concentration. The co-counsel was looking at the ceiling. Enzo by the door had become perfectly still in the way that large, dangerous animals go still. After, Matteo repeated. 3 weeks after? A month? He had months, Giulia. 7 months. 6 months of knowing, she corrected, and allowed herself to look at him then directly without flinching. I needed time. Time. His voice cracked just once, just barely. He pressed it flat immediately. For what? To decide. To decide. He stared at her. To decide what? What I wanted. She held his gaze. Whether I wanted you involved. The words landed exactly as she knew they would. She watched him absorb them, watched the stillness deepen, watched something move behind those dark eyes that she had once spent hours trying to read and had never fully succeeded. And, he said, a single syllable. Heavy as stone. I decided, she said, that the child deserves to know who his father is. That's why the terms have been amended. There's a co-parenting clause. Ferrante will walk you through it. Matteo looked at her for a very long moment. Then he pushed back from the table, stood and walked to the window again. Leave us, he said. The co-counsel started. I'm sorry. Leave. Now. Ferrante looked at Giulia. She gave a small, precise nod. He gathered his papers with practiced calm, gestured to his colleague, and within 30 seconds, both lawyers were on the other side of the door. Enzo moved to follow them. You stay, Matteo said without turning. Enzo stopped. Julia remained seated. She placed her hands flat on the table and watched Matteo's reflection in the window glass. The broad silhouette, the tattoos dark against his skin, the faint movement of his chest as he breathed. "Is it mine?" he said to the window. "Yes," she said. He turned then. Fast enough that she felt the shift in the air. He crossed the room in 4 strides, not threatening, not advancing, simply closing the distance, and stopped at the edge of the table closest to her. Up close, she could see what she had not allowed herself to notice from across the table. He looked older. Not badly. Matteo Rinaldi would never look bad, age would simply refine him the way it refined iron. But there were shadows beneath his eyes that she didn't remember. The jaw was tighter. The hollows under his cheekbones were more pronounced. The neck tattoo, Italian script reading Fedeltà sopra tutto, loyalty above all, stood out against skin that was paler than she remembered. He had not been sleeping. Or eating. Or, she wondered, briefly and against her better judgment, he had been neither of those things because he had been looking for her. He pushed the thought down. "A boy," he said quietly. She hesitated. Then, yes. Something moved across his face. Not quite visible. Not quite hidden. "I would have." He stopped himself. "What?" she asked. "Genuine. No edge. I would have wanted to be there," he said. "For the appointments. For..." He stopped again. His hand, the knuckle-tattooed hand, hovered for just a moment near the edge of the table, not reaching for her, just suspended in the space between them. "I would have come, Julia. If you'd told me." "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't tell you." He stared at her. "Because you would have come," she said. "Careful. Precise. And I would have let you. And nothing would have changed." The silence stretched. Enzo by the door was looking at the floor. Matteo pulled back his hand. "Step back." The discipline he exercised over himself was extraordinary to watch, like watching a fire bank itself deliberately. He breathed. He turned partially away. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Then, "You're living in Turin." Not a question. She didn't ask how he knew. Of course he knew. He had resources she couldn't imagine. She was mildly surprised he hadn't shown up on her doorstep sooner. "I have an apartment," she confirmed. "Alone. With my friend Serena for now. I'm moving to my own place next month." "You're not going back to Turin," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry. You're 7 months pregnant. You're not going back to Turin alone." "Matteo. He is my son." His voice was completely flat. Factual. And yet it vibrated with something enormous underneath. "I am not going to allow my son to be born in a city 3 hours from me while I stand here and sign papers that pretend. You don't have a choice in." "I have every choice." He turned back to her fully. The dark eyes were burning now, not cold anymore, not water still. Something had ignited behind them. "I have not signed those papers, Julia. I have not signed them in 6 months. And I am not signing them today." She breathed in slowly through her nose. "The terms include..." "I don't care about the terms." He leaned forward, both hands on the table now, the forearm tattoos vivid against the mahogany, and looked at her with the full force of his attention. "Come home." The word struck her somewhere she had spent months reinforcing. She kept her voice steady. "That is not an option. I'm asking." "You're not asking," she said. "You're instructing. The way you instruct everything. The way you instructed me to not worry about the woman at the gate. The way you instructed your people to handle things at midnight when you thought I was asleep." He didn't flinch. But he went very still. "I heard you," she said. "October. In the garden. I heard what you said. A beat. That situation," he said carefully, "was not what. I don't need to know what it was." She gathered her bag and stood, slowly, because 7 months pregnant required that now. "I need you to sign the papers. The co-parenting clause is generous. You'll have access. You'll have a relationship with your son. That's what I came here to offer. It's a good offer, Matteo. Take it." She moved around the table toward the door. He moved, not to stop her, not physically, but to position himself between her and the exit in the way that wasn't blocking but was unmistakably present. Standing between her and the door at a distance that was respectful and yet somehow made the room smaller. "You're not well," he said. And then immediately, "I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, you look tired." You look like you've been carrying something that's too heavy and trying to make it look easy. She stopped. She hadn't expected that. She had expected anger. She had expected the cold, controlled fury she knew he was capable of. She had expected negotiation strategy, legal threats deployed through lawyers. She had not expected that. She kept her face neutral. I'm fine. Julia. There it was again. Her name. That specific weight. Let me take you to lunch. No. Not a negotiation. Not a discussion. Just, he paused. The tattoos on his knuckles shifted as he loosened his grip on the chair he'd caught hold of. You haven't eaten since this morning. You drove 3 hours. I took the train. 3 hours on the train. You need to eat. She looked at him for a long moment. This changes nothing, she said. I know, he said. It was the first time in their entire acquaintance that she had heard him say I know as a concession rather than a statement of fact. The difference was small. The difference was enormous. She let out a slow breath. 1 hour, she said. And we're not alone. Ferrante. Just us, he said quietly. No lawyers. No Enzo. Just us. He should have said no. She knew that. She knew herself well enough to know that just us was the most dangerous 2 words in her particular vocabulary when it came to this particular man. He said yes anyway. They ate at a small trattoria 3 streets from the legal office. The kind of place that had been there for 40 years and would be there for 40 more, with low ceilings and tables too close together and a proprietor who called everyone caro as if he meant it. Matteo had called ahead. Of course he had. There was a corner table waiting. Not ostentatiously private, he was smarter than that, but positioned so they wouldn't be easily observed. He pulled out her chair. She sat without comment. He ordered wine for himself. A single glass, she noticed, just one, and mineral water for the table without asking her preference, because he remembered that she didn't drink during the day and that she preferred still water over sparkling. That was the thing about Matteo Rinaldi that she had never fully resolved. He remembered everything. Every preference, every small detail, every fleeting comment made weeks or months before. It was a quality that felt like devotion when things were good and like surveillance when things were not. How has the pregnancy been? He asked. Normal, she said. Any complications? None. The doctor is excellent. In Turin. He accepted this. Reached for the bread basket and placed a piece on her plate. Not asking, not performing, simply doing it the way he always had when they ate together, the automatic gestures of intimacy that hadn't been unlearned. She chose not to comment on it. You said you're moving next month, he said. Into my own apartment. Yes. In Turin. Yes, Matteo. He turned his water glass slowly in his hand. The knuckle tattoos caught the warm restaurant light. The neck script was partially visible above his collar. He was in a suit today, all black, the jacket buttoned, the shirt open at the throat by exactly 1 button. And despite everything, despite the months apart and the papers waiting on that mahogany table and the enormity of what she was carrying, he was still the most formidable-looking person in any room he entered. He had missed him. She had missed him every single day for 6 months and she had refused to allow that to be a reason. I want to be at the birth, he said. She looked at her water glass. I'm not asking you to take me back, he said. I'm not asking you to change the terms. I'm asking, as his father, to be present when he arrives. She pressed her lips together. You said yourself, he continued quietly, that he deserves to know who his father is. That's why you put the co-parenting clause in. Yes. Then let me start being his father now. Before he arrives. She looked up at him. His face was, and this was the rarest of things, entirely unguarded. No armor. No strategy. The dark eyes were simply open, and what was in them was something she had only seen once before, briefly at an altar in Florence, when she walked toward him and he looked away. She turned her gaze to the window. Outside, Milan moved past in its ordinary afternoon. People with bags, a delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. Did not push. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Good food, honest silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. And in the silence, Julia became aware of something she didn't want to be aware of. Felt like before. The early before. The good before. The before when she'd believed in the Titian painting version of him. The honest emotion, the real thing. She straightened herself internally. There's something you should know, she said. He looked up. About why I didn't come back. She folded her hands around her water glass. It wasn't only the woman at the gate. It wasn't only what I heard in the garden. He waited. It was the accumulated weight of it, she said. Of loving someone who is always more committed to protecting his kingdom than to protecting his wife. I felt like a room in your house, Matteo. Beautiful. Well appointed. But behind a closed door. He was very still. And I know, she said, that you think love is the same thing as control. I know that for you, keeping someone safe and keeping them close is the same instinct. But it isn't the same thing. It isn't even close to the same thing. He set down his fork. The forearm tattoos moved as he folded his arms on the table. The Italian script, sang E Pietro, blood and stone, twisted with the motion. You're right, he said. She blinked. You're right, he said again. Like he'd been holding the words for months and was only now releasing them. I know how to build walls. I don't know how to let someone through them without making the opening look like a risk. She stared at him. I handled you, he said, and the word handled was said with a kind of quiet horror, like he was only now hearing how it sounded. Like I handle everything. Like it was a problem to be managed rather than He stopped. Rather than a person who deserved more than management. The silence between them was different now. Not angry but electric. Why are you saying this now? She asked. Genuinely. Because you're sitting across from me and you're 7 months pregnant with my son, he said, and I spent 6 months not sleeping and not eating properly and sending people to Turin to confirm you were safe without ever allowing myself to simply come and say this to your face. She looked at him for a long time. You were having me watched, she said. I was making sure you were safe, he said. There's a distinction. There really isn't. He acknowledged this with a small movement, not quite a nod, not quite a flinch. Something in between. I know, he said for the 3rd time. 2 days later she was back in Turin. She had not agreed to anything. She had told Ferrante that the meeting had been inconclusive, that Matteo would need additional time before signing. Ferrante had given her the look of a man who had seen this particular dance before and was reserving judgment. She had taken the train home in the late afternoon, watched the Italian countryside move past the window in its autumn palette, and placed both hands over the curve of her belly and talked quietly to the baby the way she did sometimes when she needed to think out loud. He's not what I expected, she told him. He's never what I expect. The baby shifted in response, a slow, deliberate roll, and she smiled despite herself. Serena met her at the door with soup and the immediate non-negotiable warmth that had made her one of Giulia's favorite people in the world. Serena was small and loud and had a habit of saying exactly what she thought approximately 3 seconds after she thought it, which was either exhausting or refreshing depending on the day. How was he? Serena demanded, placing the soup bowl on the table with authority. Strange, Giulia said, sitting down carefully. Strange as in, dangerous strange? Or strange as in he apologized. Giulia picked up the spoon. Actually apologized. The real kind. Not the deflecting kind. Serena sat across from her with the expression of someone revising a thesis. Don't me. I'm not you, I'm processing. He wants to be at the birth. Of course he does. He said. Giulia stopped. Set down the spoon. He said he knows he managed me like a problem. Serena was quiet for a moment. This was notable because Serena was rarely quiet. Do you believe him? She asked. Giulia looked at the table. At the window. At the soup going slowly cool in the bowl. I don't know, she said honestly. I believe that he believes it. I believe that he means it. Whether that's enough to change anything. It's not about enough, Serena said. It's about whether you want it to. The phone call came 3 days later. Not from Matteo. From a number she didn't recognize, which alone raised the particular prickle of alarm she had developed from 18 months of living adjacent to danger. She answered it. Signora Rinaldi. A man's voice. Smooth. Too smooth. The kind of smooth that was a tool. Or perhaps just Signora Conti now. Since you're trying to be done with the name. Her grip on the phone tightened. He stayed very still. Who is this? She said. A mutual acquaintance, the voice said. Of your husbands. Or soon-to-be former husbands. I do appreciate the semantics. Pause. We'd like to have a conversation with you. No, she said. I'm afraid it's not quite optional. Another pause, and in the pause something shifted. The veneer of smoothness cracked just slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks entirely. The baby's going to be a Rinaldi. That makes the baby relevant to certain interests. I think you understand. Her blood ran cold. Don't call this number again, she said and ended the call. She sat for 30 seconds. Then she called Matteo. He answered on the first ring. I've been waiting for you to call, he said. And before she could speak, something happened. Yes, she said. Tell me, he said. She told him. The silence on his end was not empty. It was the silence of a man processing information at speed, running calculations she couldn't see. A man's voice, he said. No name. What did he sound like? Mid-40s. Southern accent. Calabrian maybe. Another silence. Heavier. Julia, he said, and his voice had changed completely. The restaurant version of him, unguarded, apologetic, tentative, was gone. This was the other voice. The one she'd heard at midnight in the garden. Low, authoritative, absolutely certain. Listen to me carefully. I'm listening. You need to come back to Milan. Matteo. I know what you're going to say, he said. And I understand. But this isn't about us. Someone has accessed your contact information. Your unlisted Turin number. That means they know where you are. That means the apartment you're moving into next month is already compromised. She pressed her hand over her belly without realizing she was doing it. Who are these people? She asked. A pause that told her more than his words did. People who have been waiting for leverage, he said. I've been managing a situation for the past 4 months. I thought. He stopped. I thought I had contained it. Apparently I was wrong. Your situation, she said. The kind that gets handled at midnight in gardens? Yes. No deflection this time. Yes, exactly that kind. She closed her eyes. I'm not going to lie to you, he said. Not about this. Not anymore. Will you come? She opened her eyes. The baby moved, that same slow, deliberate roll. I'll come, she said. Enzo came for her personally. She had not expected that. She'd assumed Matteo would send someone, but she had not expected it to be Enzo himself, in the estate's dark sedan, pulling up outside Serena's building at 9 in the morning with coffee in a thermos and a quiet, careful manner that reminded her of why she had always trusted him. Serena had taken one look at the situation and announced that she was coming too. Enzo had accepted this without argument, which told Julia something about the briefing he'd received. The drive to Milan was quiet. Serena slept against the window. Enzo drove with the particular alertness of a man executing a task he considered serious. Julia watched the road and thought about nothing and everything. He didn't sleep, Enzo said once. She looked at him in the rearview mirror. After your call, Enzo said. He was on the phone until 4 in the morning. Moving people. Setting things up. You don't need to tell me that, she said. I know, Enzo said. I'm telling you anyway. She looked out the window. He had you watching me in Turin. He had me confirming you were safe, Enzo said with the same distinction Matteo had made, and unlike when Matteo said it, she couldn't quite find the argument against it. Were you ever going to tell him about the baby? Enzo asked. Gently. Eventually, she said. I was waiting until, she stopped. Until I was sure of my ground. Enzo nodded. He's not easy to be sure around. I know. I've worked for him for 16 years. And, she said. He glanced at her in the mirror. And in 16 years, he said carefully, I have never seen him the way he's been for the last 6 months. She said nothing. He blamed himself, Enzo said. Properly. Not the way powerful men usually blame themselves, briefly and then redirect. He sat with it. She kept her face neutral. But her hand found its way to her belly again. That's all, Enzo said. I'm done. She almost smiled. The estate was exactly as she remembered it. Stone and iron. Long gravel drive. The gardens in their late autumn state. Bare-branched, formal. The kind of beauty that required no season to validate itself. The main house with its high ceilings and good light and the smell of old wood and something she had never identified but always associated with the building itself. She had not been back here in 6 months. She had thought coming in that it might feel like walking into someone else's past. Instead it felt dangerously, specifically familiar. Like a piece of music she had told herself she'd forgotten and discovered she hadn't. Matteo was waiting inside. Not at the door, he would not have allowed himself something that revealed. But in the main hall, standing near the staircase, his forearms visible, the tattoos dark and present, the neck script catching the light. He looked at her. He looked at her belly. Something moved in his face. Quick, vivid, gone. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't come for you," she said. "I came because someone threatened my child." "Our child," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "Yes. There's a room prepared," he said. "Same one. The room you—" He stopped himself from saying your room. "The one at the east end. With the good light." "You remembered that I liked the east light," she said. "I remember everything," he said. Simply. No performance in it. She held his gaze for one moment too long. Then she walked past him toward the stairs. That evening, after dinner, which Matteo had arranged with quiet efficiency, making sure there were things she liked and nothing that had ever made her feel unwell, and a chair that was a different height than the others because it was easier for her to sit and stand with the pregnancy, he asked if she would walk with him. Not a command. An ask. She pulled on her coat and they walked in the garden in the early dark, the gravel soft beneath their feet, the bare trees making their skeletal patterns against the sky. He walked beside her at a careful distance. Not touching. Not crowding. "Tell me about the Calabrian," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "His name is Duca. He runs an organization that has been competing for territory I control. For the last 2 years it's been contained. Managed. Handled," she said. "Yes." He accepted the word. 3 months ago they shifted tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, he paused. They started looking for pressure points. She understood immediately. "Me?" "Yes." She breathed through her nose. "Because they thought you'd trade territory for my safety." "They were right," he said without hesitation. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "Matteo," she said. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't tell me I shouldn't have said that. It's true and you deserve the truth more than you deserve a performance of calm calculation." She looked up at him in the dark garden. His face was in shadow. The neck tattoo was a dark line above his collar. "That's exactly the kind of thing," she said, "that makes this complicated." "I know," he said. "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it," he said. Above them the November sky was deep and clear. The estate was quiet. And Giulia Rinaldi, who had left this garden in January with a suitcase and a letter and the absolute conviction that she was done, stood in the cold dark with her husband and felt the conviction begin terrifyingly to shift. She turned before he could see it on her face. "I need to sleep," she said. "Of course," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow. About Duca. About the plan." "Of course," he said again. She walked back toward the house. At the doorway she paused, not turning. "Matteo," she said. "Yes." "Thank you for—" She stopped. Started again. "For not making this about us. For making it about him." Pause. "He's always going to be the priority," Matteo said. "Whatever you decide about us." She went inside. He stood in the garden for a long time after. The neck tattoo caught the light from the house windows. Fedeltà soprattutto. Loyalty above all. He had spent 20 years deciding what that meant. He was beginning to understand he had gotten it wrong. Giulia is back in the estate. The home she fled, carrying Matteo's son, protected by the man she left, hunted by an enemy who wants to use her as leverage. And somewhere in the cold November garden, the wall she has spent 6 months building has developed its first crack. Tomorrow, Duca will make his next move. And what happens next will force both of them to choose between the life they destroyed and the one that's already growing. Please like, share and subscribe. She woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of raised voices. Not in the house, outside it. Below her window. Male voices, rapid Italian, the clipped cadence of men relaying information rather than arguing. She lay still for a moment, hand on her belly, the baby quiet and warm, while she catalogued what she was hearing. One of the perimeter guards. A third voice she didn't recognize. She was out of bed before she'd consciously decided to move. She pulled on a thick robe over her nightgown and crossed to the window, not opening it, just standing to the side where she could see without being easily seen. There were 3 men in the garden near the east wall. Enzo was on the phone. The guard was holding something, a paper, a photograph, she couldn't tell. The third man, the stranger, was gesturing with the controlled urgency of someone delivering bad news on a deadline. She watched for 30 seconds. Then she went to find Matteo. He was in the study on the ground floor, which she had learned not to enter during their marriage and which she walked into now without hesitation. He was standing behind the desk, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, the forearm tattoos vivid under the study lamps. Both hands were flat on the desk surface, and he was leaning over a series of photographs spread across it, his jaw tight. He looked up when she entered. He didn't tell her to leave. She noticed that. The old Matteo, or rather the Matteo of their marriage, would have said go back to bed with absolute authority and expected compliance. This Matteo looked at her for a moment and then looked back at the photographs. Duca moved faster than I expected, he said. He crossed to the desk. He didn't protest. She looked at the photographs, surveillance images, grainy but legible. Her building in Turin. The front door. The lobby. Several images clearly taken from inside the lobby itself, which meant someone had been inside. When were these taken? She asked. Tonight, he said. In the last 4 hours. After I left. Yes. He studied the photographs. In one of them, near the lobby elevator, there was a figure that was blurred but recognizable. Serena. Serena, she said, her voice sharp. She's fine, Matteo said immediately. I had someone at the building by the time Enzo showed me these. She's being brought here. Julia looked up at him. You moved fast. I moved the moment you called me, he said. I've had people repositioned since yesterday morning. You anticipated this. I anticipated that they would escalate once they knew you'd called me. Once they knew you were with me. He reached forward and gathered the photographs into a single stack. They're watching the communication channels. They know you're here now, which is... He paused. That changes things. How? She asked. He looked at her directly. This estate is more defensible than your apartment. That's the straightforward answer. And the less straightforward one? He was quiet for a moment. The lamp light caught the Sang e Pietra script on his left forearm, the old ink moving with the subtle tension in his muscles. They wanted leverage, he said. In Turin you were alone and isolated and they could have... He stopped himself. Pressed forward. Here, you are surrounded by 30 men who would take a bullet before they let someone reach that door. Because I'm the wife of Matteo Rinaldi. Because you are carrying my son, he said. And then quieter. And because you are Julia. She held his gaze for a moment that was too long for comfort. Tell me the plan, she said, stepping back from the edge of whatever that moment was. He straightened. The tactical Matteo reasserted itself, cool, measured, formidably intelligent. He walked her through it without condescension and without omission, which was the first time in their relationship he had done either of those things simultaneously. Duca's organization was based in Calabria but had expanded north. They had been operating in a corridor that overlapped with Rinaldi territory for 2 years. Matteo had managed the tension through negotiation and strategic withdrawal, ceding certain interests to avoid open conflict. It had worked until Duca's ambitions grew beyond what concessions could satisfy. He wants the northern distribution network, Matteo said. Which I'm not going to give him. So he shifted to pressure. Using me, she said. Using you, he confirmed. And now the baby. A muscle in his jaw moved. Which is why this ends now. How? She asked. Genuinely. Not confrontationally. I've been in contact with 3 other families, he said. Duca has been stepping on everyone's toes, not just mine. I've been slower to bring them in than I should have been. Because it required admissions I didn't want to make. Admissions of vulnerability, she said. Yes. She almost smiled. Your pride nearly got me killed. He looked at her without flinching. Yes. That's extraordinarily honest. I'm attempting a new approach, he said, and there was something in it that was not quite humor but lived in the same neighborhood. She looked at the desk. at the cleared space where the photographs had been. At his hands, knuckle-tattooed, resting on the surface. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He looked up. Something passed through his expression quickly. Surprise, she thought. Gratitude. "Nothing," he said. "Stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle the rest." "You know how I feel about that phrase," she said. "I know," he said. "This time I mean it differently." "Tell me how." He looked at her steadily. "Before, when I said handle it, I meant handle it and keep it from you. Keep you separate from it. Behind the closed door." He paused. "Now I mean, I am going to do the things I am suited to doing. And I would like you to do the thing that is more important than any of it, which is to rest and take care of yourself and the baby. Not because I think you're incapable, but because the division of labor seems correct." She considered this for a long moment. "That," she said carefully, "is a more reasonable version of the same instinct." "I'm working on it," he said. "The instinct is old. It doesn't retrain quickly." She almost reached out. She caught herself. "Go to bed," she said instead. "You have 3 hours before you'll need to be useful." He looked at her, and the expression was one she'd only seen a handful of times. Undefended. Almost soft. "Julia," he said. "Go to bed, Matteo." He went. Or he tried to. She was already turning toward the hallway, and she didn't see whether he actually moved or whether he stood in the study a while longer in the lamplight with his forearm tattoos and his old pride and the photographs of a life that was still not resolved. She suspected the latter. Serena arrived at 6 in the morning with her cat, a carry-on suitcase, and the complete moral authority of someone who had been dragged out of bed by 3 strangers and was owed an enormous explanation. Julia provided it over breakfast. All of it. Including the parts she had previously withheld about the full scope of Matteo's world. Serena listened with uncharacteristic silence. She drank 2 full cups of coffee. She looked at the walls of the estate dining room, high ceilings, old paintings, the particular grandeur that had never stopped feeling slightly surreal, and then she looked at Julia. "And you love him," Serena said. "Not a question. That's not the relevant." Julia. Pause. "Yes," Julia said. "Against all evidence of good judgment." "Love doesn't really check for evidence," Serena observed, refilling her coffee. "He hurt me," Julia said. "Even if not intentionally. Even if through negligence rather than cruelty. The effect was the same." "Is he the same?" Serena asked. Julia thought about the study. About the photographs laid out without concealment. About "I know" said as a concession rather than a claim. "No," she said. "I don't think he is." "Then what are you afraid of?" Julia placed both hands on her belly. The baby shifted, slow, deliberate. Her small morning ritual, she'd come to think of it. A conversation without words. "That he'll revert," she said. "That the change is situational. That he's only like this because I'm pregnant and because there's a threat and because the circumstances have forced him into a corner where honesty is the only available tool." "What would it take?" Serena asked. "For you to believe it's real?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. 3 days into her return to the estate, a meeting was held. She was not in the room for it. Not because she was excluded, but because she chose not to attend, having made the deliberate decision that observing Matteo's world from a safe distance was different from inhabiting it. She heard the voices through the closed library door. Multiple men. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Afterward, Matteo came to find her in the east sitting room, where she had been reading with a lamp positioned behind her shoulder and the baby active and rolling in the afternoon warmth. He sat across from her without asking if she wanted company. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, the tattoos exposed, and looked at the floor for a moment. "Duca has been given a choice," he said. She set down her book. "He can withdraw from the Northern Territories and accept the boundary agreement he refused 18 months ago," Matteo said. "Or the 3 families who joined the coalition will make the withdrawal non-optional." "He'll accept," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Almost certainly." He looked up. "He's not suicidal. He overextended and he knows it now. The move against you was a desperation tactic." "Desperation is unpredictable," she said. "Which is why there are still 30 men on the property," he said. "Until the agreement is signed and verified." She nodded. She turned the book over in her hands. "When it's resolved," she said, "I'll need to go back to Turin, To finalize the apartment and... I know, he said. She looked at him. I know, he said again, and this time it was the hardest version of those two words. The one that cost the most. I'm not going to try to keep you here, Julia. I told you that in the trattoria and I meant it. This was about safety, not... He pressed his lips together. Not about using a threat as an excuse to bring you back. She believed him. She was increasingly, uncomfortably certain that she believed him. But I would like to ask you something, he said. She waited. When the baby comes, he said. Would you be willing to be in Milan? Not here. Not the estate if you don't want this. But in the city. Close enough that I can. He stopped. Started again. Close enough that I don't miss things. Things, she said. The first time he moves. The first time he looked away briefly. The neck tattoo moved as he swallowed. I missed 6 months of knowing about him. I don't want to miss anything else. The silence was very quiet. I'll think about it, she said. It was the same answer she'd given in the divorce office. But it meant something different this time and they both knew it. The agreement with Duca was signed on the 8th day. Matteo received the confirmation at mid-morning. He found Julia in the garden. She had started walking in the mornings, slow circuits of the gravel paths, which the November cold had sharpened into something bracingly good for thinking. And he stood at the garden door and said simply, "It's done." She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. He was in the doorway, jacket off, forearms visible, the morning light catching the ink. He looked, not relieved exactly because relief implied he had been afraid, and Matteo Rinaldi did not permit himself the vocabulary of fear. But something had released in him. Some held tension. He was a degree lighter than he had been for 8 days. And Serena? Julia asked. She can go home whenever she chooses. Though she has eaten approximately everything in my kitchen and I believe she and my head of security have developed what I can only describe as an inexplicable rapport. Julia felt the laugh come before she could stop it. It surprised them both. Matteo looked at her with an expression she recognized from the altar in Florence. The same undisguised, completely unstrategic thing crossing his face before he could prevent it. She stopped laughing and looked down at the gravel. I'm going to go home soon, she said. I know. To Turin. I know. To finalize the apartment. Julia, he said. Quiet. Careful. She looked up. He had crossed the garden without her noticing. He was close now. Not touching. But close the way he had stood in the divorce office between her and the door. Not blocking, just present in the specific way that made all other space secondary. The neck tattoo was inches away. Fedeltà soprattutto. I have something to say, he said. And I need you to let me say it without you building the counter-argument while I'm talking. She held very still. I'm listening. He breathed in. The forearms shifted as he moved his hands, bringing one up, then stopping himself from reaching for her, letting it settle at his side. When I stood at that window in Ferrante's office, he said, and I turned around and I saw you, I want to tell you what happened. Not to explain myself. Not to make a case. Just to be honest because I promised you I would be. She waited. Everything went quiet, he said. Not the way a room goes quiet. The way I go quiet when I'm about to make a decision I know is going to cost me everything. He paused. Because I understood in that moment, before you even sat down, before a single word was said, that I had made the defining mistake of my life. Not by letting you leave. By making leaving the only rational choice you had. The garden was very still. I had built a world, he said, that I thought I was protecting you from by keeping you adjacent to it but not in it. But adjacent to a fire is still close enough to burn. She pressed her lips together. I don't deserve. He stopped. Revised. I'm not asking you to come back because I deserve it. I'm asking because I am not the same person who stood in that garden on a Wednesday in October and spoke in the way that a man speaks when he has forgotten to be a human being. He met her eyes. I know I have to earn that back. I know it will take time. I know you may decide. He stopped. His jaw tightened. I know you may decide that the time is not worth it. And I will accept that. I will be his father regardless. I will be whatever you need me to be in whatever arrangement you can live with. He looked at her. But I need you to know, he said, that you are not a room in my house. You were never a room in my house. You were the reason the house had any meaning at all. And I didn't know how to say that without the words feeling like possession. I'm learning the difference. The wind moved through the bare trees. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She looked at the gravel. She looked at the trees. She looked at the man standing in front of her. This enormous, complicated, tattooed, impossible man who had broken her and was now standing in a November garden trying to be honest about the architecture of his failure. You hurt me, she said. I know. Not once. Accumulated. Repeatedly. Through inattention and assumption and the belief that keeping me safe was the same as loving you, he said. I know. Stop saying I know, she said. Say something real. He was quiet for a moment. The knuckle tattoos shifted as he pressed his hands together. I'm terrified, he said. She looked at him. I am not someone who says that, he said. I have not said that to a living person in 20 years. I say it to you now because you asked for something real and that is the realest thing I have. What are you terrified of, she asked. That I will do it again, he said. Not intentionally, but through old habit. Through the patterns that were laid down in me long before you. That I will manage instead of love. Control instead of trust. That the instinct will win over the intention. She held his gaze. At least you know it, she said. At least I know it, he agreed. Which is not the same as having fixed it. But it is different from not knowing. She breathed in. The baby moved. That slow rolling shift that she had begun to recognize as the baby's particular way of participating in the moments that mattered. She looked down. And without entirely meaning to, she said, he moves a lot when your voice is around. Matteo went still. She hadn't meant to say it. It was the kind of truth that arrived before she could screen it. The kind Serena would have flagged as significant. She looked up and found Matteo's expression entirely undone. Not the studied composure. Not the tactical stillness. Not even the vulnerable openness he had been showing her these last days. Something else. Something foundational. He looked at her belly with an expression that belonged to a completely different version of him. The version that might have existed without all the weight in the empire and the ink marking every promise he'd ever made to people who demanded things from him. Can I? He stopped. She understood the question without it being completed. She took his hand. The knuckle tattoos were warm against her fingers. She placed his hand against the side of her belly where the movement was strongest. She watched his face. The baby rolled. Matteo Rinaldi, head of the Rinaldi syndicate, a man whose name made other powerful men change their plans, a man who had built 30 years of untouchable authority, exhaled sharply through his nose and closed his eyes. His hand was very still against her. He's strong, he said quietly, almost to himself. Very, she said. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, not the belly now but her face, her eyes, the expression she was too unguarded in this moment to conceal. Julia, he said. Don't, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. I'm not going to say anything, he said. I just need to, he breathed. I need you to know that whatever you decide this. His hand pressed the softest fraction against her belly. This is the most important thing that has ever happened to me. You are the most important person in my life. And I am not saying that as a negotiation. I am saying it as a fact that I should have said 2 years ago and didn't. She didn't trust her voice. So she did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward, slowly, carefully, the pregnancy making everything deliberate, and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Not an embrace. Just a moment of contact. Of not needing to be entirely separate. He didn't move. He didn't wrap his arms around her. He stood perfectly, carefully still, the way a person stands when they have been handed something fragile and they know it. His thumb moved just once against the curve of her belly. They stood like that in the garden for a long moment. Then she pulled back. She smoothed her coat. She looked at the gravel. I'm going to go back to Turin, she said, her voice recovered. I'm going to finish arranging the apartment. All right, he said. And then, she paused. And then I want to think about being in Milan. For when the baby comes. He said nothing. But she felt the change in him. Not the estate, she said. No, he said immediately. Whatever you need. Something separate. My own space. I'll have options for you by the end of the week, he said. She almost smiled. Already negotiating. Old habits, he said. But there was something in it, self-aware, almost warm, that belonged to the new version. She turned toward the house. Matteo, she said without turning back. Yes. I'm not saying yes to any of it. I'm saying not yet. But not never. Pause. Not never, he said like he was placing the words somewhere safe. Not never, she confirmed. She went inside. She returned to Turin for 2 weeks. She finalized the apartment. A beautiful light-filled place on the 4th floor with west-facing windows and enough space for a nursery and the kind of quiet that felt chosen rather than imposed. She packed up Serena's spare room with gratitude and a dinner that lasted 4 hours and involved more wine for Serena and more honesty between them than she had managed in months. She attended her 30-week appointment with her Turin obstetrician, who confirmed that everything was excellent and that the baby was, as she knew, vigorous. He did not call Matteo. But she sent one message. A photograph of the nursery corner she was setting up, the afternoon light falling across it in exactly the way good light does when it's trying to make a point. He responded with 3 words, "He'll love it." She stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she began, quietly and without announcement, to look at apartments in Milan. The apartment she found was in the Navigli district, near the canals, with tall ceilings and old tile and a courtyard that caught the morning light on the east side. It was nothing like the estate. It was entirely its own thing, which was the point. She called Matteo to tell him she was moving. "To Milan," he said. "To Milan," she said. A silence. The specific kind. "When?" he said. "End of the month. Before the 34th week. Doctor's orders. No more long drives after that." "I'll send people to help with the move," he said immediately. "Matteo. I'll strongly suggest that you permit people to help," he revised. "Better," she said. "May I see the apartment?" he asked. "When I'm settled," she said. "Not before." "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." There was a warmth in the phrase now that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there and she had not trusted herself to hear it. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "The woman at the gate," she said. "Is that resolved?" "Completely." Pause. "Her name is Valentina Greco," he said. He stopped. Chose his words. "There was something years ago. Before you. I ended it completely when we started. I should have told you who she was when she appeared. I chose to handle it quietly and I chose wrong." "Is she connected to Duca?" she asked. A surprised pause. "What makes you ask that?" "The timing," she said. "She showed up. 2 months later, you started hearing from Duca's people." Another pause. Longer. "You're perceptive," he said. "I was a bookkeeper's daughter," she said. "Numbers and patterns were my first language." She fed them information, he said quietly. About the estate's layout. Access points. Schedules. He paused. "About you. Is she?" "She is no longer in a position to be a problem," he said. He caught himself. "The situation has been resolved. Completely. Months ago." He processed this. "You could have told me," she said. "You had left me," he said. "And rightly. And a pause that sounded like it cost him. "I was ashamed. That someone I had trusted that closely had used that trust as a weapon aimed at my wife." "Your former wife," she said. Gently. "You haven't signed the papers either," he said. Very quietly. She blinked. He was right. She hadn't. She had told Ferrante she needed more time, and Ferrante had filed for a standard extension without comment. "No," she said. "I haven't." The silence was electric. Neither of them said the thing the silence contained. "I'll let you know when I'm settled," she said. "Whenever you're ready," he said. December arrived early and cold. She moved into the Navigli apartment on a clear Thursday morning with the canal catching the winter light and a warm coat that still didn't entirely button over 32 weeks of pregnancy and a sense of arriving at something she couldn't name yet. The men Matteo sent were efficient and discreet and addressed her as Signora and didn't comment on anything. By noon the furniture was placed. By 3 the nursery corner had its soft gray rug and its small white dresser and the simple wooden mobile she had ordered months ago, back in Turin, when the apartment was still an idea. She stood in the nursery corner at the end of the day and felt something she recognized as home. Not the estate. Not Serena's spare room. Not her childhood apartment. Hers. He called Matteo. I'm settled, she said. Good, he said. You can come see it, she said. Tomorrow if you like. For lunch. A pause that was not hesitation but something more like a man steadying himself. I'll bring food, he said. You don't need to. I want to, he said. Let me bring food. Fine, she said. Midday. Midday, he said. She hung up and looked around the apartment. Her apartment with its tall ceilings and good light and the nursery corner waiting for someone who would arrive in approximately 7 weeks. And felt for the first time in a very long time like the ground was solid. He arrived at noon exactly in a dark coat with his forearms covered for once by the sleeves, though the neck tattoo was visible at the open collar. He carried a bag from a restaurant she recognized, a place in the Brera district that she had mentioned exactly once 18 months ago as somewhere she'd always meant to try. He remembered. Of course. She let him in. He looked around the apartment with the assessing gaze he brought to every space, cataloging exits, sight lines, security vulnerabilities she suspected in the first 3 seconds, and then seemingly satisfied he took in the rest of it. The light. The high ceilings. The canal view from the kitchen window. The nursery corner with its soft gray rug. He stopped at the nursery corner. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the small white dresser and the wooden mobile and the single small lamp she had positioned on the shelf. It's good, he said quietly. I know, she said. He looked back at her. Almost smiled. They ate at the small kitchen table. The food was extraordinary of course because Matteo Rinaldi did not bring mediocre food, and they talked about the baby. The name. She had been thinking about names and had 3 candidates and he listened with his complete characteristic attention and offered 3 of his own and they negotiated the way they had always been good at negotiating, with honesty and some humor and the particular chemistry that had existed between them since a Florence gala and a Titian painting. By the time the food was cleared, something had shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Not announced. Simply, present. Like a door that had been closed for a long time standing ajar, and both of them aware of the draft. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up. When I packed the suitcase in January, she said, I told myself I was leaving because I had to. Because I had no other rational option. She looked at her hands. But part of me, a significant part, was also terrified. Of what? He asked. Of how much I loved you, she said. Of what it meant to love someone that much and still feel invisible to them. Of whether, if I stayed, I would eventually stop being able to tell the difference between love and habit. He was very still. I needed to know, she said, that I could choose. That I wasn't staying because leaving felt impossible. I needed to be the one who chose. And now, he said. She looked up at him. Now, she said, I am choosing. The silence was enormous and warm. He reached across the table. Slowly, deliberately, the knuckle tattoos visible as his hand crossed the space between them. He placed his hand over hers, not grasping, not claiming, just covering. Warm and specific and present. Julia, he said, and her name was different this time. Not a sentence. Not a wait. Just a word that held everything he was. I know we can't go back, she said. I'm not asking for back. Neither am I, he said. I want something new, she said. Built differently. With different terms. Tell me the terms, he said. She turned her hand over under his. The knuckle tattoos were against her palm now. Honesty, she said. Not managed honesty. Not strategically released information. Real honesty even when it's difficult. Yes, he said. No decisions made about my life without my involvement, she said. No protection that looks like control. Yes, he said. This apartment stays mine, she said. I keep my independence. Even if, she paused. Even if we are building toward something. Always, he said. And you learn, she said, to be in a room with me without solving me. He looked at her steadily. That will be the hardest one. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. He turned his hand over so they were holding each other. His thumb moved across her knuckles the way his thumb had moved against her belly in the garden. Yes, he said. To all of it. To whatever terms you set. I am not negotiating. I am agreeing. She breathed out slowly. We start here, she said. We see what we build. Here, he said. Yes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon in early January, Exactly 1 year after she had walked out of his estate with a suitcase and a letter, Julia went into labor. It was earlier than expected by 2 weeks, which the doctor had mentioned as a possibility and which Julia had filed under things she would manage when necessary. She called Matteo from the apartment while she was still calm, still organized, still sufficiently in control to speak in complete sentences. "It's time," she said. He was at the apartment in 11 minutes. He did not ask how. She didn't comment on the fact that 11 minutes was not entirely possible by normal transit from the estate, which meant he had been closer than the estate. She simply opened the door and he was there, coat slightly open, forearms visible where his sleeve had partially rolled, the neck tattoo above his collar, his face carefully controlled and his eyes absolutely not controlled at all. "The bag," he said. "In the hall," she said. He picked it up. He offered her his arm, not grabbing, not steering, just offering. He took it. They went down the stairs together. The hours that followed were long and extraordinary and impossible to fully describe, the kind of hours that compress time and expand it simultaneously. The hospital room was warm. The doctor was calm and capable. Serena arrived. She had moved back to Milan by this point, something she attributed to her new friendship with Enzo which she refused to elaborate on, and sat on the other side of the bed from Matteo, holding Julia's hand and talking about nothing important in the way that was enormously important. Matteo was, and she would remember this, not the person she had feared he might be in a hospital room. He was not commanding. He was not attempting to manage the situation. He sat where she told him to sit and held her hand when she asked him to and was quiet when quiet was needed, and once when the hours were difficult and she was less composed than she intended, he leaned forward and spoke very quietly into her ear. Not instructions, not reassurance of the performative kind, just her name, just Julia, just "You are the bravest person in this room," and she believed him. Their son arrived in the early hours of Wednesday morning. The sound of him, immediate, indignant, specific, was the most extraordinary thing she had ever heard. She watched Matteo hold him for the first time. He took the small wrapped bundle with the particular care of a very large man handling something infinitely precious. He cradled the baby against his chest, against the forearm tattoos, against the ink that marked every loyalty he had ever claimed. He looked down at the face of his son with an expression that was entirely private and entirely unguarded and entirely unlike anything she had seen in 3 years of knowing him. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then very quietly to the baby, "I'm going to do better." Just that. Not a performance. Not a declaration for anyone else in the room. Simply a man making a promise to his son in the only way that counted, directly and without witnesses except the people who already knew his whole heart. Julia watched him. The neck to, the forearm script, the knuckle letters. Fidelta soprattutto. Loyalty above all. She thought he has spent his whole life loyal to the wrong things. He thought he knows it now. He thought not never. She was discharged after 2 days. Matteo drove them home. Home to the Navigli apartment, not the estate, without suggestion or negotiation. He helped her upstairs. He set up the nursery corner with an efficiency that suggested he had spent considerable time studying it in advance. He made coffee. She had graduated to a small single cup, doctor approved, and set it on the kitchen counter and then stood in the doorway of the apartment and looked at her and the baby in the afternoon light. "I should let you rest," he said. "You should," she agreed. He nodded. Moved toward the door. "Matteo," she said. He stopped. "Stay," she said. "For dinner. If you want." He turned. The expression was the altar one. The one he couldn't control. "I want," he said. He stayed for dinner. He stayed while the baby slept in the corner and she sat on the sofa and they talked. Quietly, carefully, the way two people talk when they are building something that has to be built slowly. He stayed until she fell asleep on the sofa and he put a blanket over her without waking her and sat in the chair across the room for a while in the lamplit quiet. He left before she woke. But he left a note, not on the kitchen counter the way she had once left a letter. This one was on the table beside the sofa where she'd slept. It said, "When you're ready, I'll be here." The weeks that followed were the beginning of something. He came every day, not intrusively, not possessively. He came when invited and he was invited daily because the baby was there and because Julia found, to her own constant assessment, that the days felt different when he was in them. He did not revert. She watched for it, she was honest with herself about that, she watched for the management, the control, the midnight garden voice. What she found instead was a man making deliberate, visible effort. Who asked before deciding. Who told her things without engineering how much she received. Who sat with the baby and talked to him in the low, careful voice that made the baby still and attentive and that made Julia have to look at something else. He brought her things she needed without being asked, which was different from providing things she hadn't requested because he always asked first now. He had learned the distinction. 6 weeks after the birth, she called Ferrante. The papers, she said. Pause. Yes, Signora Rinaldi? I'd like them withdrawn, she said. A longer pause. You're withdrawing the petition, she said. Yes. Ferrante was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing. I'll handle it immediately, he said with the precision of a man who had seen this particular dance before and was, this time, satisfied with how it ended. She told Matteo on a Sunday. She didn't announce it. She simply, at the end of an afternoon that had been ordinary and warm and everything she had been quietly trying to build toward, handed him the copy of the withdrawal notification that Ferrante had sent. He read it. He looked up at her. She was standing near the kitchen window, the canal light coming through behind her, the baby asleep in the nursery corner, the apartment around them full of the particular quiet of a Sunday that has been spent well. This doesn't mean, she started. I know, he said. It means you're not done. That's enough. It's more than enough. She looked at him. Come here, she said. Quietly. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the neck tattoo, the forearm ink, the knuckle letters she had traced once with her thumb in a November garden when the wall had its first crack. She reached up, past the tattoos, past the expensive suit, past everything, and placed her hand flat against his chest. His heartbeat was strong under her palm. I'm not forgiving the past version of you, she said. I'm choosing the current one. He placed his hand over hers against his chest. The knuckle tattoos were warm. I'll spend whatever time you give me, he said, being worth the difference. She let out a slow breath. Then she leaned forward and he met her, and the kiss was nothing like the ones they had when they were first learning each other. It was slower. More specific. The kind that has weight behind it because it has been arrived at rather than fallen into. When they separated, she stayed close. The terms stand, she said. The terms stand, he agreed. This apartment stays mine. Always, he said. And you keep learning, she said. Every day, he said. The baby made a small, specific sound from the nursery corner. Not crying, just announcing his presence, which was his particular habit. Both of them turned toward it. Matteo looked at her. She nodded. He went to the baby. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him cross the apartment. The large, tattooed, complicated man who had once stood at a different window with his back to the room and everything he'd built, and pick up his son with extraordinary gentleness and begin the low, careful voice. She pressed her hand to her own chest where his hand had been. Outside, Milan moved in its ordinary evening, the canal catching the last of the winter light, the city carrying on in all its beautiful, practical indifference. Inside, something was being built. Not reconstructed. Not restored. Built. Differently, with different materials, tested in ways neither of them would have chosen but could not regret. The baby was quiet in his father's arms. And Julia Rinaldi, who had walked into a marble room 7 months pregnant and changed the geometry of a man's entire world with one entrance, stood in her own apartment on a Sunday evening and allowed herself to believe in the thing she was choosing. Not without fear. Not without the memory of everything that had fractured. But with the particular clarity of a woman who had built her own stable ground and knew now exactly what she was choosing to stand on. The lamp in the nursery corner cast its warm circle of light. Matteo looked up from the baby and found her watching. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But in the quiet of that look, across an apartment that was hers, with a child that was theirs, on the ground she had built and he was learning to stand on too, there was something that required no translation. Fedeltà soprattutto. Loyalty above all. He finally understood what it meant. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, please like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Were you rooting for Julia and Matteo from the beginning? Or did you need to see him change first? See you in the next story.